institutions. Its purpose is to deal with issues like climate change, racism, inequality, and gun control. It is called ESG. How does it work? And how will it change our lives? Are we bending Wall Street to our will, or are we the ones who will be manipulated?
Your deposits are safe.
Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank have been taken over by regulators. Other smaller banks are being closely watched to avoid a similar collapse. There was panic that depositors would not be able to access their funds over the insured maximum of $250,000. But after emergency moves by the Treasury, the funds have been made available Monday. Unlike the 2008 bank bailout, President Biden says this one is not pulling from taxpayer money.
No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund.
The president also promised there will be an investigation into what caused the second and third largest bank failures in U.S. history.
My understanding is this bank was making longer-term investments and wasn't ready for the spike in interest rates caused by the Fed raising discount rate.
Now, earlier today, federal regulators announced that they will be transferring all the deposits and assets of Silicon Valley and Signature Banks to a new FDIC-operated bank. Reporting from the live desk, I'm Christine Spiro, Fox 5 News.
Christine, thanks. The Northeast is bracing for a power.
Claimed it measured goodness, virtue, how well you were behaving. Somewhere along the way, that sales pitch changed and became ESG was pushed as something that would make companies more valuable. You could earn as an investor, you could earn more than the market. Then about 3 years ago, when that pitch stopped working, they said ESG is really a measure of risk. It's really nothing to do with virtue. It's nothing to do with goodness. And part of the reason is as each pitch failed, they kept shifting the goalpost. I'll be quite honest. I think that reflects part of the problem here is ESG is built on quicksand. The services and advocates of ESG have no idea what they're measuring, and they keep changing their mind.
What are your views on a company that scores better on ESG and giving it a higher valuation?
I can't give a company a higher valuation. It's got to earn it, right? Value doesn't come from what I think about the company. It comes from the company's capacity to generate cash flows, to grow those cash flows, and its risk. And this is the show me part of ESG. So I remember Larry Fink at the peak of ESG's glory, getting up there and saying, ESG is good for value. And my reaction is you're either lying, Larry, or you have no idea what value is. Because if you believe that ESG is good for value, show me where. Is it in the cash flows? Is it in the growth? Is it in the risk? And collectively, if you look at the evidence in ESG, there's absolutely no evidence that indicates that ESG shows off in any of those numbers. And if it doesn't, it's not affecting value. Here's the problem. ESG was sold on a false promise. It was sold as, hey, you can be good and you can make money. It was sold on a lie. If you want to be good, you got to sacrifice something. I mean, remember, there were funds pre-ESG. The Anno Domini Fund used to be a Catholic fund, which basically invested based on Catholic principles. And you know what? Good for them. But they were honest. They told people, look, if you want to invest, you're a Catholic, you want to invest based on Catholic principles, we're here. But they were open about the fact that by restricting themselves to only companies that met their criteria, they were going to have to give up returns. That's an honest pitch. The way they sold it was, you're going to earn lower returns in this universe, but you get heaven afterwards. That's a promise I can go with. And the problem with ESG is not that there are ESG funds. I don't have a problem with ESG funds themselves. I have a problem with the fact that it was, at least for a period, it's no longer, I think, as strongly pushed. It was pushed on people who had no choice. People were made to invest in ESG funds, and they had no control of the process. That's not right.
And what do you think the impact will be, ESG, on society?
None. In fact, it's going to be to make society worse off. You know how much of our energy came from fossil fuels in 2012 before ESG took off? About 82%. You know what percentage of our energy came from fossil fuels in 2022 after 10 years of ESG wins? 82%. So where's the win? What's happening? Why isn't it going down? Because what we've done is we've taken fossil fuel production and pushed it in the hands of private equity investors. That's exactly what's going to happen when you put selective pressure on publicly traded companies and make them give up on things that you claim are bad. They don't go away. It's moved into different hands, and you're going to have no control in how they're developed. So my view is ESG is going to make society worse off. It's going to make some people richer, but society overall is not going to be one of the beneficiaries, because it's going to mean we're not going to act on our problems because we're assuming that they're being dealt with already.
Isn't that a grand expression of the laws of nature and of nature's God?
Well, we know from the Declaration of Independence that the purpose of government is to secure the natural rights of the citizens. And in fact, as Jefferson tells us in the Declaration of Independence, that's not just the purpose of this particular government. That's the purpose of any government that's made for human beings.
So in the Declaration, you have all men are created equal. And that has led lots of people to make all kinds of assumptions about men and women, about blacks and whites, about and so on. It's not about human equality in the sense of we're all the same. It's about human equality in the sense of no one has the right to dominate anybody else without their consent. So the natural right idea arises from the notion that not only are we born equal in the sense nobody's ruling, we also have a right, a moral claim that we can make on behalf of that state. We do belong, we do deserve to be equally free and equally free. And from that then comes the idea of a natural right to liberty, from which, in the founders' minds, all the other rights in one way or another can be derived. And government's duty is to provide equal protection. So no matter how wealthy the perpetrator might be, what race he might be, or the sex of the person committing the crime, government has the same obligation to prosecute and punish in the same way anyone who commits the crime.
And so one way to think about the difference between the Declaration and the Constitution is it's a document about ultimate purposes, what they call in classic philosophy final causes. Final causes are the things that we seek above all others, the things we would die for. And so the Declaration of Independence states those, and of course those words echo around the world still today, even when they're distorted. You're going to learn something about that in this course.
How can a government be made strong enough to restrain men without abusing its power over the people it's established to protect? The best answer to this very important question is provided by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay in the Federalist Papers.
In the 51st Federalist, Madison is explaining why you have to build a constitution that has precautions in it. It has to grant power. You have to have that. But also it has to constrain power. You have to have that. And the way he puts the point is, what is government but the profoundest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither internal nor external controls on the government would be needed.
Unlike the American progressives, who we're going to talk about later in the course, the framers of the Constitution were not utopians. They were not dreamers about human nature. And partly this is a result of this lesson that they're learning in the 1780s. The 1780s taught them, and even taught people like Jefferson, that human nature is always going to be a mix of good and bad, of reason and passion. This is language you see, if you've read the Federalist Papers, you see those words all the time in the Federalist Papers. The good part of human nature justifies government by the consent of the governed. But the bad part of human nature, the lower nature, the passions, teach the framers that there's a need for limits on government. That the rule of the majority simply has to be structured in the right way, has to be channeled in the right way.
And they also had in mind not just virtues in the way that the kind of virtues that we tend to think of, for example, moderation, justice, restraining yourself, not harming other people. That's the kind of thing we think of today, but they also thought of the harder virtues, the tougher virtues, as necessary for government to promote. the manly virtues, as they called them, courage, vigilance against potential government oppression, prudence, being hard-headed about things in a way that goes against the common view. They thought it was important for that to be encouraged among those citizens who were capable of them.
You know, a lot of people don't have their money in these banks, but do you think we'll see more contagion in the banking industry at large?
No, I think contagion was averted. That was the significance of the step that the Federal Reserve, FDIC, and Treasury took last night when they stepped up and said that depositors, whether you're in a bank or a credit union, your money's safe, your money's accessible, whether you're under the federal deposit insurance limit or above the federal deposit insurance limit, your money is safe and accessible. And what that does is that prevents what could have been massive bank runs. All of a sudden, depositors don't need to move their money out of safety concerns because the money's protected. But I do want to be clear. We might see more bank failures because the idea isn't to keep banks that make poor risk decisions in business. It's to prevent good banks from getting swamped unnecessarily with withdrawal requests out of a panic. That's where that would have been a real problem, and that's what this program is designed to avert. But banks that make bad decisions, sure, they could still be subject to failure, as they would in any other environment. But as depositors, whether you're under or over the deposit insurance limit, your money is safe.
Greg, tell us about the fail-safes that were put in place after the 2008 financial crisis. How did legislation like the bipartisan Dodd-Frank Act help?
Well, it did shore up capital requirements. That's why a lot of the larger banks are much better capitalized at this point than they've been in years.
In history. And therefore, the government was becoming less and less of a danger to the governed and more capable of achieving those things that the people wanted to achieve, of solving the great problems of human history. And so FDR used this to pronounce an entirely new vision of freedom. Right? Freedom from necessity. The idea that if one is constrained by economic necessity, he's not really free. And that government must be the instrument of liberating people from economic necessity. We can see then that the problem here is for government to intervene and achieve a better balance between production and consumption. We have to control production. We have to control prices. We have to control profit margins.
Nearly 100 years have passed since FDR's New Deal magnified the role government plays in our everyday life, which is why it's so important for us to not lose sight of what our founding fathers had envisioned. You see, having taken Hillsdale's Constitution 101 course, I'm more prepared than ever to defend free government against the growing forces that want to transform our nation into something completely unrecognizable to our founding fathers.
And now you can, absolutely free, with Hillsdale College's most popular
U.S. bank failure since 2008. The news is making waves in America, with ripples also spanning across the Pacific to investors and startups in China. Chinese biotech companies alone have more than $240 million deposited in the bank. SVB's website says it's been operating in China for more than 20 years through a Chinese joint venture. It was popular among China-based venture capital firms and was one of the first banks to serve Chinese startups. A dozen Chinese firms have issued statements since SVB collapse. Most are biotech companies trying to pacify investors and clients. That's by saying their exposure to the bank was limited. Among the hardest hit company is BeiGene, one of China's largest cancer-focused drug makers. It said Monday it had more than $175 million in uninsured cash deposit at SVB, representing about 4% of its cash and short-term investments. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration recently approved a drug from BeiGene for treating a certain type of leukemia. In second place, biotech company Bribio is also taking a major hit. It had $42 million cash and short-term investments in SVB. That money makes up about 9% of the company's cash deposits. Bribio was part of the effort to launch the first combination therapy for COVID-19 in China. And another pharmaceutical firm, Zai Lab, announced that its cash deposit at SVB were immaterial at about $23 million. These three Chinese companies, plus others, say SVB's closure won't impact their operations or payroll.
And benefits. The administrative state seems to be sincerely uninterested in performing the tasks that our founding fathers expected legitimate government to perform. Major cities have chronic amounts of unsolved murders, which they never seem to bother to get to in many cases. It inverts its priorities. It becomes intensely focused on things that legitimate government ought not to do, and it neglects the things that just government should do.
Hillsdale's free online course, Constitution 101, hammers home why our Constitution is such an important document for us to look to right now. Freedom and the American way of life are under threat, and it's our responsibility to restore the principles of liberty that underlie our Constitution through education. Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, succeeded in doing this during the American Civil War. We commit to this cause of educating ourselves. A new birth of freedom is possible for us today.
To work with.
Saudi Arabia is the world's top oil exporter. Mills said the United States has disliked Saudi Arabia since the Obama years. Now, China is a major player.
Well, they need the oil desperately. They're getting it now, but it has to go through the Straits of Malacca by Indonesia and Singapore. It's extremely vulnerable. This secures the land bridge over Afghanistan, which the Biden team messed up also, and the pipeline being built from Iran to China. And now they can just, Saudi Arabia doesn't even have to ship the oil. They can just connect to the same pipeline, and it goes straight. Now China has energy security.
The White House National Security Council is aware of the renewed ties and said they're hopeful this will help to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East. Mills said the White House is seriously misunderstanding how this relationship affects Americans. For Americans watching this who don't quite
Joe
understand
Biden's an
how
idiot.
international relations affect them on a personal level.
Knows that Alaska has the highest environmental standards. I can't say it was fully expected, but it's welcomed by the vast majority of the people here in Alaska.
The project quickly garnered praise from both sides of the aisle, both Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski and newly elected Democrat Congresswoman Mary Peltola, saying the project will generate revenues and create jobs. And some say the project is good news for the neighboring state of California.
But a lot of that oil ends up getting refined in California. What those Alaska barrels do is they replace Saudi oil that is coming via ship into California.
In recent weeks, the Biden administration striking a different tone on oil and gas.
So we're going to need oil for at least another decade.
I would like to think that the president got a wake-up call.
Biden's teetering on a narrow line as he still tries to keep his grip on his progressive base. The Willow Project is scaled back from 5 drilling pads to just 3. Still, climate activists slam it as a lack of climate leadership and accuse Biden of handing over an intact ecosystem to ConocoPhillips. Messaging like this emerging as popular on social media, notably on the Chinese-owned app TikTok. Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan last week telling reporters,
over 300 million views relating to stopping this project. Maybe that's the Chinese Communist Party trying to influence young Americans.
Climate groups will likely launch court challenges to stop the project. But if all stays on track, oil could be flowing down the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in 3 to 4 years. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Deepening ties between the U.S. and Australia. The White House announced today that Australia will be buying 3 nuclear submarines from the U.S. Australia also has the option to increase the purchase to 5. The submarines are worth around $3 billion each. Australia aims to put them into use by the 2040s. The purchase comes under a security pact between the U.S., the U.K., and Australia, known as AUKUS. The pact was created in 2021 to counter the Chinese regime in the Indo-Pacific region.
Governments and global institutions. It's its purpose is to deal with issues like climate change, racism, inequality, and gun control. It is called ESG. How does it work? And how will it change our lives? Are we bending Wall Street to our will, or are we the ones who will be manipulated?
These are Elaine Richards reports.
House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer subpoenaed Bank of America, asking for 14 years' worth of financial records related to 3 of Hunter Biden's business associates. The committee is investigating the Biden family's business dealings with a now bankrupt Chinese energy conglomerate. Comer has said accessing financial information for the Biden family and its business associates is a top priority. He told Fox News the committee already has bank records in hand.
So now we have in hand documents that show just exactly how the Biden family was getting money from the Chinese Communist Party. And I will tell you, it's as bad as we thought.
Committee ranking member Jamie Raskin, a Democrat, has said the number of records requested was unjustified. Comer told Fox News despite many delays, the committee is making progress.
We have individuals who are working with our committee. In the last 2 weeks, we've met with either these individuals personally or with their attorneys. And that would be 4 individuals who had ties in with the Biden family on their various schemes around the world.
The investigation comes amid the Biden administration's early year promises to take a harsher stance on China through a series of new policies aimed at limiting China's influence. Critics call it a potential conflict of interest. In a nationwide survey conducted by the Trafalgar Group in late February, an average of 57.2% of respondents answered yes when asked if President Biden faces a conflict of interest in taking a tougher stance on China. 80.9% of Republicans and 53.5% of non-party respondents answered yes, with 54.9% of Democrat respondents answering no. More recently, Biden has characterized China as a competitor rather than an adversary. The third-term leader of the Chinese regime seems to agree. In a speech at the annual Chinese Communist Party meeting, Xi Jinping stressed the need to be self-reliant through strength in science and technology.
No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see, delightful snacks to nibble, a gay, pleasant evening for all. Oh, a word of caution. Don't drive over 10 miles an hour in the theater area for your safety's sake.